Have you ever just finished a project, stood back to look at it, and said, this paint job is You're not alone. After a bunch of trial and error and too many projects to count that I've repainted, I'm going to be sharing the tips and tricks that I've learned so that you can get a smooth quality finish with your projects. So let's get into it. One of the biggest mistakes that you can make when trying to paint your projects actually happens before you even touch the paint. Prepping is key to getting a smooth and quality finish across all of your projects. And prepping is where your major focus and time is going to lay. So what exactly is involved in prepping? I'm so glad you asked. Number one would be sanding your material. Whether you're using wood, acrylic, sheet metal, any type of material should be sanded before you paint. Why? Even if it's smooth, you're going to want to create an adhesion point for the paint to stick because it can easily chip if you don't. And of course, if you're using unfinished wood with a non-smooth surface, you're definitely going to want to sand that down because you want to get rid of any soot left over from your laser if you're laser cutting a project, or any splintering that might have happened during the cuts of your wood. If you're building from the ground up and your wood is very rough, you're going to want to start with a very low grit sandpaper, somewhere around 60 or 80, and work your way up to maybe a 120. Then eventually you're going to want to hit a 220. That's the goal. And if you are using a factory finished wood or something like acrylic, you're still going to want to use that 220 grit. It takes away the smooth coating and leaves a grip for the paint to grip onto. The idea here is to rough up the surface, not necessarily remove the material. Once that's done, it's on to the next. The next step in prepping is priming your piece. Now, I've experimented with different primers, and I'm going to be sharing the ones that I think work the best, at least for me. I tend to favor spray painting over hand painting because I find it to be easiest. I personally have a spray paint booth set up in my basement, so it makes an easy environment for me to paint throughout the year. When I first started painting, I picked up any old spray paint primer, and I typically use Rust-Oleum brand. No knock on Rust-Oleum, it's actually what I go to the most. But they do have different types of primers, and this is what I found. You may find this one at your local hardware store like a Lowe's or Home Depot. I've tried this, and although it does work as an okay primer, it never worked for my needs. And here's why. This primer pretty much just sits on top of your project as a base layer for your paint. For the girls in the room, it's like applying a base coat before applying your gel polish. This primer pretty much just sits on top and works as a nice adhesion point. But if your nails aren't properly sanded, then you may still see some ripples or bumps in your paint or your nail polish. I don't even remember which one we're talking about at this point. Which is why I found this one to be the best that works for me. Why is that? Because this is specifically made to be a sandable primer. Throughout your painting process, you're going to want to sand your project a couple of times to get that nice, clean finish. And this is really only achievable with multiple sanding sessions. Now, for those hand painting with a brush or a roller, you're still going to want to use a primer and sand it afterwards. In my experience, I've used a couple of different brands between Behr and Valspar, and I honestly didn't really see a difference. However, I did see a difference when I didn't prime versus when I did prime. Now, a couple more things to note when you do prime your piece. You are going to want to have patience at this point because if you try to sand your piece before the primer is completely dry, you're going to end up leaving marks behind, which completely defeats the purpose of priming it to begin with. Ask me how I know. On the topic of priming, I have another huge useful tip for those who use MDF. I personally use a lot of MDF in my projects. Some people love it, some people hate it, but it exists. And I personally like it because it's cost efficient, it works really well on my laser, and it is very easy to paint. Some might be like, hold on, no it's not. But here's where the tip comes in. MDF isn't like regular wood. It's made in a weird process where they take regular wood and they grind it down to create a bunch of little pieces, kind of like sawdust. They add a bunch of adhesives and flatten it out to create a sheet of MDF. So with that, if you would imagine taking a handful of sawdust, adding water, what happens? It completely soaks up the water. That is what happens when you try to paint MDF. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out why every time I used MDF, the paint job would be dull and it would take forever to dry. that was why. So after a bunch of experimenting, I finally found shellac. Shellac is pretty accessible. You can find it in spray form, or you could find it in a paint-on version. You're definitely gonna get more bang for your buck if you buy the can. So what does this do for your MDF? If you add a coat of shellac to your MDF, essentially it seals it, reducing the absorption along the painting process. And this is kind of step one when I am using MDF. So after it's completely dry, I then move on to the sandable primer. Yes, I still use both because I found it to be the best process to get a good solid adhesion of paint, and it dries much quicker than before. So give that a try if you want, and you're welcome. Another thing to keep in mind when painting is your environment matters a lot more than you think. Extreme colds can lead to uneven curing, longer dry times, and even cracking, especially with spray paint. On the opposite side of that, extreme heat and humidity can also increase your dry time. There have been so many times where I've tried to get through projects in very thick humidity, and at the end of it, they just remained tacky. So here are some things you could do to combat both of these. If you're painting in the winter or you're just in a colder region, I recommend warming up your paints. If it's spray paint or your cans, you can get a large bucket of warm water and let them soak maybe for an hour or so before you paint. You can also try using a space heater if you're indoors. And for hot, humid temperatures, you can of course cool down the room, but a dehumidifier works wonders. I actually have two, and they are constantly going near my paint booth to make sure I have the proper environment for my painting area. And if you can avoid it, just try waiting for another day when it's less humid. Now on to some spray painting basics. One huge thing to do if you're spray painting is to shake up your can. Yes, it takes time. Yes, you gotta do all of this, but it is worth it in the end. You're gonna wanna do it for at least 1 to 2 minutes. Now you can do it by hand, or you can invest in one of these. I thought it was dumb at first, but once I got it, it saved my arm from a lot of exhaustion. Additionally, if you're spray painting, you're gonna wanna keep a consistent distance from your spray can to your piece. If you spray too close, you're gonna end up with a big blob and it's going to take forever to dry. You're gonna have a lot of inconsistencies and you don't want that. Again, we're striving for a smooth, clean finish. So here's how you achieve it instead. Keeping a consistent distance of 8 to 10 inches the entire time, you're gonna wanna do very light coats. Multiple light coats will add up time, but it is worth it in the end. Alternatively, if you just go for one thick opaque coat, if you find that you have to go back and touch up spots, you're gonna be left with a thick and tacky mess. Trust me. And speaking of tacky messes, it took me a very long time to figure this out, but there is a difference between the different paint sheens and drying time. The typical spray paints you pick up at your local hardware store are likely going to be either matte, semi-gloss, or gloss. I recommend starting with a matte coat. If you're a beginner trying to improve your technique, it's the best way to work on projects without seeing all of the imperfections. It's good for hiding some stuff if you need to. If you have to use a gloss, just remember, sanding and prep is your best friend. Along my spray painting and experimenting journey, I've come across these paints. I'm not sponsored or anything, I would love to be, but I really like these paints because they come in a variety of colors and they do come in matte. What a matte finish will also do for you is reduce drying time by a lot. Your projects are gonna dry pretty quickly, and it'll be very simple to add those multiple layers of paint. Again, on the opposite end of that, if you go with a gloss, it is going to take longer to cure. This is for those who are hand painting with a paintbrush or a roller. In one of my last videos where I created a huge sign, you saw me struggling with rollers. And it was during this project where I found the difference between a foam roller and a nap roller. So here's a quick summary. If you're looking for a smooth finish with minimal texture, you're gonna wanna use a foam roller. The downsides to this is they pretty much come in small sizes, so they really work for small projects. On the other side of that, if you're working on a very large project, a nap roller is gonna be your friend. And it's not that you can't achieve a smooth finish with a nap roller, it's just gonna take some practice. It was actually in that video where I found a technique where you can achieve that. You can start by using a nap roller to get most of your coverage, then follow up with a foam roller to smooth it out. If you wanna see how that worked, you can go check that out. Additionally, foam brushes are very cheap to come by. I get them at my local dollar store and I always have them on hand. And at the end of all of this, it really comes down to the biggest mistake is not having patience. If you choose to rush your sanding, your dry time, or your coats in between painting, then you're going to end up with a project that you're going to be disappointed with. You'll end up saving a lot more time in the long run if you do the job correctly the first time. I can definitely vouch for that. It's not about fancy tools or spending the most money on the most fanciest paints and paintbrushes. It really comes down to a good technique using the tips and tricks that I shared in this video and your patience. And if you're interested in learning how to paint fill a laser engraved project, then you're gonna wanna watch this video. So I hope you found this video useful, and until next time, stay inspired.